It's Mike and Rachel Novak, Growth Drivers Podcast, and today gonna bring you some raw, hard talk. We're gonna talk about building business as a couple. How the fuck do you do this?
This is a
tough one.
This is a tough subject.
How do we balance marriage and being entrepreneurs together? We're gonna break that all down for you today. The good, the bad, the fucking ugly, just nasty parts as well. Gonna get super raw. We're going to unpack that all for you today. We've been in business together through multiple businesses over the lifespan of our marriage. Yeah. And I think that we've learned some things the hard way that we can share with people that are going to take away and say, hey, either I don't want to get into this with my spouse, or hey, I'm going to deploy some of the things that you've taught me, and I'm going to make sure that when I do this, I do it right. So let's jump into it. Let's talk about kind of how we recommend getting into business with your spouse. I think it starts with kind of a needs analysis. What are the pros and the cons of actually partnering with your spouse or your girlfriend in business? I mean, you're kind of my girlfriend at the time we bought the restaurant.
We
business.
absolutely were not married yet. Yeah, the first time we got into business together. We were committed for sure, but we were not married.
Right. And we came from two very different worlds. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about that? You came from kind of the banking side of things.
Yeah. I mean,
no entrepreneurship.
No, I came from a world of where stability was king, and getting a W-2 job and showing up and doing, excelling in that was commendable. And there wasn't a significant era of entrepreneurism, although ironically, my father was a pastor and he was technically an entrepreneur by running his own church and creating his own revenue that way. But it was never painted to me as a life that was sustainable. It was always a struggle. And so I found comfort in stability. So I was in banking. I was a bank teller, working my way up to becoming a personal banker at the time, the ripe young age of 19 years old. And you came from a totally different side of the tracks. Yeah.
We met when you were 19. I was 20. You were working at Banner Bank, mm-hmm. which is still around. And I was in the development and building business. So mm-hmm. two different worlds. I had been introduced into entrepreneurship back when I was 14 or 15 years old. And it came through kind of a couple of different mentors in my life. I had a boss when I was 16 years old in a landscaping business, and he introduced me to Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I read that book and I just could not put it down. It totally changed my thinking. I was like, wow, all this bullshit society tells us we should be chasing is a load of crap. And it's actually a trap. And I don't want that. I want to call my own shots, and I'm going to get in entrepreneurship. I was dead set on it at 15 years old.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, when I met you, it was you were the most driven, clear, and calculated person that I had ever met. And you were good looking. So it was really a whole package for me at the time.
So it came from two different worlds. I mean, we could probably do a whole podcast on that.
Right.
And we didn't really actually take the time to talk about should we get into business together? We just decided to do it. Why do you think that was?
Well, I mean, number one, we were just completely obsessed with each other. We could not wait to see each other. We spent every single waking minute that I was not having to be on the clock together. I'd come and visit you at the office. You would still get work done and all those things, but we were always together. And so for us, it was how do we meld this life, and how do we create something? There wasn't even a second guess. We didn't sit down and talk about is this the right thing? There was no calculations. There was no pros and cons. There were no, let's weigh this out and discuss our strengths and our weaknesses before we got into business. We just both charged forward.
Yeah. And it worked for us, mm-hmm. but I think it did involve a certain degree of chaos that you could maybe avoid if you did just kind of have, just took a step back and sat down with your spouse or girlfriend and said, hey, does this make sense?
Yeah.
What are the benefits? What are the kind of drawbacks? And I think that a lot of people, when they think about the benefits, it's going to be what we had, proximity, right? We're going to get to spend a lot of time together, which can be a good thing or a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's kind of the ability to do something and be better together than on your own. You can go further together. But on the con side, things can get really ugly too. We know people that have gotten divorced and it had nothing to do with their marriage and everything to do with their business.
Exactly.
Right? So
yeah, they let it take over.
It can get real fucking ugly.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what a lot of people don't talk about. And that's what I want to make sure that we're honest and transparent about today. Because most people just don't talk about it.
Well, that's exactly right. I think a lot of people go into it with that same mentality, but they don't evolve their skill sets in every area during the course of their, self-employment together, and they're being in business. And they also don't draw boundaries. They don't draw lines of, this is husband-wife time, this is business partner time. And it's something that we still struggle with. It's something that we still have to navigate and massage quite frequently.
We literally argued last night about something that was business and carried into personal.
Literally, yes.
Had nothing to do with personal, but it's all personal. So we did create some kind of rules for you, and we'll share those frameworks with you here in a little bit. But let's just be super raw and kind of share some of the highs and the lows over the last, so we started in business in 2007 together.
Yep.
It's 2024.
It's like 17 years.
Yeah, 17 years in the trenches together. 3 businesses. All 3 businesses became 7-figure businesses. But there was some like major setbacks and a lot of chaos along the way, and when I look back on that, I think every single one of those things made us better, like we are today, who we are because of those things.
Right.
But in the moment, they could fucking break people.
Absolutely. I mean, let's talk highs of working together first, and then we'll go downhill. Highs of working together are that you get to see each other and spend a lot of time. Like that is really fun, especially when your partner is your best friend, like we are. We enjoy each other's company. We make each other laugh. We have a lot in common. We genuinely like the other person as a person. We like seeing each other. We like making eyes across the office or across a restaurant and stopping each other's butts randomly when nobody's looking. And so it's a fun, playful environment when you get to work with your spouse, because there's always kind of a level of flirtatiousness, I would almost say, that you can obviously keep under wraps and keep professional in different settings. But it's really fun being able to see each other and know where you're at every day, and kind of have a pulse on what you're doing every day too. I think there's so many marriages where you work separately, and then you have to kind of catch up everything that happened during the day. And you and I still, of course, are like that because we don't actually work together all day. But there's less of that when you work together. So it's fun kind of being up to date really quickly with your spouse when you get to work together.
Yeah, we now cross over like in maybe 1 or 2 meetings a day, and that's about it.
That's about it, yeah.
Definitely like going our own paths and kind of driving our own responsibilities. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think spending time together is definitely one of the benefits. If you travel for work like we do a lot, we go to masterminds and things like that and real estate conferences, it is nice to be able to go with your spouse.
Absolutely, well, yeah. And we're on the same schedule, right? So it's like where if I was in a different business or industry and had to ask for time off for that, it would be clunky, right? And it's very smooth when we can just take that time because we are both on the same schedule.
Yeah. Another one of the pros that I think about is that we have very different strengths and weaknesses. Like we have some overlaps for sure. And to like an outsider, they think that we're almost like the same people, but deep down we're actually completely polar opposites.
Totally.
And I think that like at first that could seem like, hey, that's going to cause like conflict, but it actually, if you embrace it and you respect it, it actually is kind of the superpower to together go so far.
100%. Yeah. I think that's, the ability to have so many different skill sets and so many strengths. Like once we really learn to lean into that person's genius, so to speak, and their working genius, it creates an environment where that person is going to be able to handle that. So you can actually push it off of your plate to that person and vice versa. And then over time, as we've been working together, it's like we have that trust that the other person is going to do what they say they're going to do. They're going to continue to own that area of their responsibility in the business. So you build confidence in being able to move forward together because you can accomplish so much more with 2 people with totally different skill sets.
When did you realize that, hey, it's okay to not be another Mike, but to be Rachel?
Honestly, I think it wasn't until 2019. So we were about 2 full years back into real estate, running the team, that I was actually coaching with Zen at the time. And she was the one who kind of started having me do these exercises and draw parallels and outline what my strengths are, what your strengths were. And I was able to really identify that I have some, like you said, some overlaps. So some of my strengths are definitely your strengths, but some of my strengths are things that you don't do as well. And they're not that you have weaknesses, but that you aren't as strong in those areas. And I kind of started realizing, hey, it's actually okay if I step further into those. Pulling that off of your plate actually relieves a significant amount of stress and weight that you carry in the business to allow you to do even better in the areas that you're already strong. And so, I think a common misconception in any business is that if you're working with other people, like you have to focus on your areas of weakness to build those up, right? And there's some sliver of truth to that, but I really believe that if you surround yourself with the right people in business who have opposite skill sets or similar or contrasting skill sets, that leaning into your strengths and letting your partners or your people that you work with lean into their strengths that are opposite yours, you can build so much bigger, so much faster together.
That's really like the dynamic of a team at its core.
Yeah.
Right. What about some of the lows? You know, like obviously, like, you know, it can easily carry into like home life, you know, when you get in an argument and work. You know, sometimes, like, I know for us, we're both very passionate and we will be super raw and real. And oftentimes it's in front of like our leadership team and they're like, just kind of sitting there like, what the fuck just happened? And we're like, you know, it's like full on litigation between you and I, where we're each presenting our side
case.
of the court, you know, and neither one of us want to back down. We're both giving each other like death stares and barking at each other, but there's a degree of respectability to it. I can definitely bark sometimes. But I mean, if you're not careful, when you walk out of that boardroom or that conference room, it can then carry into the bedroom and the home life. You know what I mean? So I think that can be a real negative if you can't like kind of draw that line, which can be really hard.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on the same side of the coin as a high being getting to spend a lot of time together, the other side of the coin is you have to spend a lot of time together. And that will lend itself to being rubbing each other the wrong way when you're tired or when you're frustrated or when you don't agree with that person. Like the reason that you and I do work is because we're both passionate people and because we are both people of conviction, and we have grown into people who are humble enough to say, okay, I hear you. I hear what you're saying. I don't agree with it. So let's find the threads of commonality so that we can make a decision to move forward together on this way, with maybe both of us compromising one or two things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's probably the biggest con that I can think of, is just not being able to draw that line. And then, you know, you go home and you're still pissed at each other. So how do you get past that? I mean, what's the path for people to break that down and to being able to draw that line? Yeah.
I mean, it really comes down to boundaries, right? Like it comes down to being able to say, you know, there's Mike and Rachel at work. And Mike and Rachel at work show up in this way, and we are fierce, and we are very decisive, and we are passionate, and we get shit doners, right? Like we're gonna go full throttle when we're there. And then in our personal life, we're not different, but we're softer. And to be able to say, hey, we're gonna shut that part of life off right now. Like right now, we're gonna be Mike and Rachel. I'm gonna step into my femininity. You're gonna step into your masculinity. Whereas at work, we both kind of have that masculine energy because we have to, right? At home, I can be a little bit softer. You can be a little bit softer. We can connect on different levels. We can be more intimate. We can go into the bedroom and like work off whatever fight we had earlier that day, right?
That's the best part.
And that's the best part. But that is really, like, being able to draw that boundary and remember that the conversation that's had in the context of work is not, don't let that emotion carry into the context of your personal life and into your marriage. Because at the end of the day, like, I mean, even quite frankly, the conversation we had last night and this morning, it's like, we want the same thing. Like we want the same success for each other. We typically are trying to say the same thing, but when things get passionate or things get elevated, it will tend to come across wrong, right? And both of us are, again, passionate people. We want to be right. We want to get our point across. We want to make sure that person gets it. But at the end of the day, like, we love each other and we want to be together and we choose each other every single day. So separating those two, which is at times very difficult, is the kind of the key.
I think the other key to that is to not allow it to go to a personal level, like where you start calling each other names and shit gets real nasty.
Let's talk about some of those rules, because I know we've had a podcast on that before where we kind of talk about some of these rules, but that's a super important part of this.
Yeah. Kind of like the framework that we wanted to share. And, you know, when we were like stepping back and thinking about this podcast, like, what are the fundamental rules that we think people should learn if they're going to go in business with their partner? Obviously, the first rule is you got to discuss if it actually makes sense to do it and take that risk. Like, is it worth risking your marriage for a business?
Yep.
I think the next most important thing is to look at this through the lens that the marriage will always come first. Mm-hmm. And if the business engagement is at a point where it's actually like putting the marriage in like jeopardy, and it's going to a bad place, that you'll cut that off to keep the marriage intact.
Yeah,
because I think people wait way too long for that.
That's exactly right. You know, I think, and it is like keeping the perspective that you're going to assume positive intent of the other person on a consistent basis. And your relationship was there before the business in most cases. Like ours was, our marriage wasn't, but our relationship was. And continuing to say that I'm going to choose you Mike Novak as my person, regardless of our professional life, right? Like the professional life is a pro, and if we can make it work, fantastic. But at the end of the day, it's you who I want in my life.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. I think the marriage, you have to be super clear about that. It's going to come first.
100%.
The second one, I think, is to develop your responsibilities
Which
and
is tough.
your areas that you're going to own in the business. Because if you just both play business owner, I think it's really confusing to your team and your staff, your customers. Like you're just kind of both touching everything, which doesn't really go deep on anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think there's a level of transparency that you have throughout building a business together, where like people can see if you're good at something or not, and people can see if you're competent at something or not. And I know I have totally struggled with imposter syndrome in business, where, you know, I'm trying to be this person. I'm trying to do these things just like Mike Novak does. That's not me. Like, I am not good at some of the stuff that you do. And I just finally accepted that and said, you know what I'm really good at? I'm really good at galvanizing, and I'm really good at making people feel like this is their home. And I'm really good at making sure that, you know, people are on track and that people are bought into what we're doing. Like, I'm great at the re-enrollment because I so much care about these people. And then you're fantastic at the marketing and the operations and the systems and processes, right? So it's like, I've learned to be better at those. I've learned to be good at those. And now, of course, I implement those and can build those well. And then you've had to kind of also soften a little bit and learn to relate with people and be empathetic to people a little bit more. So we've made each other better, but there's...
Yeah. And like a lot of times what I'll see like the typical marriage business engagement tends to be, and this is different for us, but it tends to be like a power player and an administrator. Like that dynamic seems to be the most common that I see. It's very rare to have what we have where we're both in the position of power. You know what I mean? Where we're like, we're driving sales performance. Mm-hmm. We're in the business of influence and impact. You know, like we're both doing that same thing. Mm-hmm. And neither one of us are at core and administrator, even though you've tried a few times.
I really think I'm a great administrator.
No. Hey, at one point you did transaction coordination on 17 files. So that's pretty good in my book. But yeah, I think that was a really unique dynamic for us. But a lot of people, they don't have that. Like and I think it's okay to do that, where you've got the one power person, you've got that administrative support. When I think of this, I think of our friends Greg and Jenny, right? Mm-hmm. Greg is the power person. Like he's got a huge magnetic pull to him because of who he is and how he speaks and what he talks about and the charisma that he has. And Jenny is like the operator, right?
Absolute
like she
operator.
is in there like making sure all the I's are dotted, T's are crossed. The business is ran like a business, right? If it was Greg, it'd be Greg and his buddies. With Jenny, it's Greg's business.
Yeah,
you
Greg's
know what I mean?
a broad stroke, you know.
Right. Yeah. So that's kind of the dynamic I see. But irregardless of whatever you do, I think you just need to define what your roles are going to be. And ours have changed a lot over the years. You know, in the real estate team, we were both salespeople and we had an administrative staff. And then about a year and a half ago, we like kind of changed that up where you officially became the team leader, which was great. I stepped back from like the day-to-day of the team, which was really a huge blessing for me. And that's kind of helped our team, you know, kind of go to that next level.
Yeah. And I think another thing to think about, which we've experienced, is not worrying so much about the titles. Like I would almost say, you know, similarly to our brokerage where there's a CEO and a president, it's like, that's kind of how we are, right? We're both in charge. And overarchingly, we make decisions together, but I'm going to deal with the day-to-day and the hiring and the overall administration and the operations. And you're going to deal with these things over here and then driving sales. But I mean, you're not a team leader, and I'm also not a team leader in all areas. So it's like, we're both the CEO, we're both COO, but we have defined responsibilities, which I think is another incredibly important part. Right?
Yeah, definitely. You know, something that we've done, obviously, job descriptions, responsibilities, and then SOPs, right? So like even as owners of the business, we're still following our own SOPs so that the rest of our team knows what to expect. We have consistency to our process, and we know what to expect out of each other that way as well.
100%.
So what about like, what are some of the routines, rhythms, meetings that need to be in place to create structure within the ecosystem of being in business together, right? Like the last thing you want to do is just coast and say, hey, you know, we're married, so we talk enough. Like we don't need to sit down and do any business planning. Like what guidance would you give people on that? What's the stuff that we found that works?
Yeah. I mean, so just like with a good team, a good sales team, a good operations team, the key is to have consistent cadences of proximity. So consistently checking in, consistent accountability, consistent not necessarily just meetings just to meet, but a meeting to connect, to make sure that projects are being moved forward down the field. It's no different in an ownership position where even if two people are married, if we just wait to talk about it at home, there's going to be no structure. There's going to be no real accountability to like objectives throughout that week. So what we've put in place are twice a week ownership meetings in the office or over Zoom, depending on where we are. Same time, same days, every single week. And we're looking at the financials of the business. So we're looking at the expenses, the profit and loss, the balance sheet. We're making sure that we're making sound decisions financially for the company and for ourselves. And then we're looking at schedule. We're looking at time off. We're looking at, plans for the future. It's both for the business and for us personally that we do these. And it used to be kind of a weekly alignment meeting, which we still do Sundays just to coordinate schedules for the week. But having that twice a week ownership meeting where we're specifically talking about things in the business, we come out of it with a list of to-dos or a list of things we need to make sure that we close the loop on that week. It's been incredibly helpful. And that's kind of what keeps us charging forward and building and creating more.
Yeah, I think if you don't do those proactive regular meetings, you end up in a very reactive state.
100%.
And that's the place you want to avoid.
Well, and being in that reactive state, to your point, that also aids in the feelings of resentment, the people heading toward divorce, because you don't have those consistent cadences to connect on things or to argue about things. I mean, I would literally probably say that 4 out of 5 meetings that we have, we are in some sort of disagreement or argument, and we work through something in that meeting, right? Yeah. Whereas if we didn't have that, when would we argue about it? Right?
It reminds me of our budget meetings where I'm like, why the fuck are we over budget here? I don't know. What do you want me to do about it? I don't know. Well, okay.
So yes. I mean, budget, spending plans. I mean, it all depends on how it's delivered, right?
We'll keep it real. All right. So the weekly meetings, definitely important. What about the quarterly meetings too? So we will, the weekly stuff is you and me.
Yep.
You lead an operations meeting with our ops team, which I'm not a part of, but I think it's really important just to create synergy with the administrative team. Mm-hmm. But quarterly, we also like to go off-site with our leadership team, right?
Yep.
And this is kind of an extension of the conversation of you and I. Like, we obviously are leading this meeting, but it then pulls in the leadership into the direction and the decisions that the team is now going to be going and making, right?
100%. Yeah. And that, so we do twice weekly ownership meetings where you and I connect on everything, finances to everything else. Every other week is a leadership meeting. So we get together for 60 minutes, catch up on the latest. What are some pressing issues? What is the next initiative that we're moving forward with the company? What technology are we implementing, or what are we changing, or what process are we updating? All that kind of thing. So it starts with us, then it goes to leadership, and then quarterly leadership goes completely offsite for a day. And we basically do essentially a SWOT analysis. So we essentially look at the company, where are we lacking? What issues do we need to resolve? What things do we need to remedy? What things do we need to cut? What things do we need to add? Is there anybody in the company that we need to address? So it's really another extension of the owners bringing in our leaders to be able to say, they're going to see things that we don't, right? So bringing in those leaders has provided us with a good perspective on where to continually push the business, and also them kind of challenging us in our capacity, making sure that our vision continues to grow so that it always is able to manage theirs within it.
Yeah, I think that's how we really get buy-in, is pulling
100%.
leaders into the direction decisions the company makes. What about communication? You and I we don't have any problems with speaking hard truths to each other.
Correct.
But I suspect that's not the case for a lot of people, because people they don't want to have hard conversations. I've just learned that, and I've seen that too. They will run away from having hard conversations. They will bottle up deep inside this frustration they have with their partner in this instance. And that can be a really dangerous place to be. And so if people if they're uncomfortable having hard conversations, what's their outlets to actually have these breakthroughs and these dialogues that are going to actually get their feelings on the table, make them feel heard, and keep this working? Because without that, its days are really limited, right?
Yeah. I mean, quite frankly, when it comes to being in business, if you are not willing and able to have hard conversations on the regular, you're not going to make it in business, period. You're not going to make it in any sort of leadership capacity ever. So no different in marriage. I think the big difference is when you are having those hard conversations with your spouse or your partner that you're in business with, it's the delivery that has to change. Right. So like if I'm delivering some really tough news to one of my operations teammates or one of my sales team, I can be harsh and I ask for permission, to be honest. And I know I get their buy-in to hear this feedback before I just slather them with it.
Have you ever had someone say, no, you can't be honest with them?
No.
Okay. Just checking.
They wouldn't belong in our world. If they said no, I'd be like, you're not a fit here at all.
Get out of my office.
Yeah, pretty much get the fuck out. But so you can ask for that permission to be honest with somebody. You can deliver a hard truth and then let them stew on it. In a marriage, we're going home together. We're going to the same place. We still are parenting the same kids. We're still sleeping in the same bed that night. So it's super important to build the skill sets of communication in regards to delivery of hard conversations and then respect that person's space when they need to digest it a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That was something that I would say I only learned the last 2 years is the process of framing.
Yes.
Like how do we frame our way into this problem? So I don't just say like, hey, Rachel, you fucking suck at this, right? I'm like, hey, honey, I think you've done so great here, here, and here. Your hair looks fantastic today. Hey, I'm a little bit worried about X, Y, Z. Like, tell me more about these, right? It just lands different, right?
It's
not what I'm saying, but it's how I am saying it.
That's exactly right.
And it's how I've entered that conversation that then elicits a response that is not defensive or hostile or makes you feel like you're being, attacked.
Correct. Well, and that's it too. It's like if you continually get a pushback, like really tough pushback, or you keep getting consistently defense, then it's likely more to do with your delivery of the news or to the feedback to that person as opposed to the content, right? And so if you can fix the delivery, if you can soften it with some compliments about my hair, or if you can soften it with some compliments or reminding them of the things that they do really well. Like, we're growth-oriented people. We live a challenge-based lifestyle. If you tell me, hey, I see a fantastic area of opportunity for you to be able to grow in this area, I'm gonna be like, fuck yeah, tell me what it is. If you say, hey, you fucking suck at this, I'm gonna be like, fuck you. Right? Like, it's a different delivery.
So I will tell you the reason this was so hard for me to understand. It's because that's not the way my brain thinks. Like, if you've got feedback for me, just give me the fucking feedback. Like, don't give me the bullshit. Just like hit it with me, right?
Yeah.
But I understand that's not like most people, and so that's why it's a huge blind spot for me.
Yeah, no, that was a huge 180. That was a huge 180 that you made, being able to frame it, deliver it, and then kind of posture yourself in a position to actually coach, as opposed to giving raw feedback and then dealing with this emotional puddle that have on the floor.
Let's talk about money. Money is the number one reason for fighting within a marriage. Mm-hmm. So it's very easy for that to show up in the business as well if you're not careful, right? So what are some of the things that we've learned about managing money when it comes to the business to keep things moving and to keep things civil? Because again, we don't want to be fighting about these things, right? Like, we want to be in synergy and sync each week.
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing is, and the mindset that I don't think we've ever really had this mindset, but I think a lot of people do, especially in the real estate space, is because these checks are so big, right? These checks that we get from the escrow companies or from the attorneys are so big for these closings. We kind of go, well, YOLO, or I deserve it. Or there's this mentality that you can then go like spend on something without double checking that you have that money to spend, or that there aren't costs to cover, or that the other person is also in alignment with that expenditure. And so one of the biggest things that we've done is kind of put a rule in place where we're going to check with each other on big expenses every single time before they happen, both personally and in the business. And as we've grown, and obviously the scale of the company has grown significantly, where we're more into like the $3 million GCI range a year, we've put kind of limits on that. We're like, I'm not going to ask you to go spend $83 on some business cards. I'm not going to ask you if I can go spend this on some signage. But bigger recurring expenses, we're going to have a conversation about them. We're going to weigh pros and cons. We're going to listen to each other's feedback. Then we're going to make an educated and informed decision together to go spend that money.
What dollar amount would you coach people on? I know this changes with the scale of your business, but if someone's running a business like ours, like at what dollar threshold should you have those conversations?
So I mean, at our business level, it's going to be subjective based on like what it's for. Like if it's a recurring marketing expense, like a lead generation expense or technology expense, just about anything over $1,500 to $2,000 a month, I think is something that it needs to be mentioned for sure. If it's a smaller business, I think anything over $500 needs to be mentioned, right? Like this is, you're talking, especially with any sort of marketing or recurring expense that you're going into some sort of contract for.
Yeah, the contract one is the big one I was going to mention. Yeah.
Like that you've got to, like I'm not committing to $500 a month at that point. I'm committing to $6,000 for that year. And that could or could not be a lot of money depending on the business that you're running. We obviously spend a significantly more amount of money. We spend multiple six figures on some of our lead sources. And so making decisions quickly and without collaboration is a recipe to make the other person feel completely disrespected and possibly put the business in jeopardy financially.
Right. I think the best way to overcome that is to come into your weekly meeting with a list of things that you propose are like initiatives you want to allocate money for. Obviously like businesses need to have budgets just like personal. And if someone's going to go outside of that budget, I think there has to be a conversation past a certain dollar threshold.
Yeah. I mean, and the other thing, I know that we've talked about it before, but every single business owner, especially two people that are married and in business together, you should be looking at the financials every single week. Like you should be looking at the profit and loss statements. You should be looking at the balance sheets every single week. Monthly is not enough, in my opinion. By the end of the month, you're screwed. Like you've either just spent it or like you're out. Like you've missed stuff. Weekly allows you to fix things in real time. And it also allows you to preemptively make decisions if you need a 20-day heads up to cancel a subscription or cancel some sort of recurring payment or something like that. And then it also, not just the profit and loss and balance sheet, but also pulling up the expenses, right? We do an expenses by vendor summary. So every single Monday, we pull what month to date have we spent on what vendors. And then we look through them, like what were these things for? Because you find, as we found more times than not, there's tiny little expenditures just going out on subscription basis that you don't even remember. You don't even know what that thing is for. You haven't used that tool in 6 months. So making sure that the health of your business financially is on the ups. The only way to do that is by checking in weekly on those things.
Right. So we use QuickBooks Online, which I highly recommend using. We have a bookkeeper who reconciles things to the day. These are just things we've learned from having other businesses. Like we need accurate financials. And then the reporting we're looking at a balance sheet, we're looking at a P&L. And like you said, the expense by vendor summary, right?
Yep,
all those things. And on the P&L, we're doing month to date and we're also doing year to date. So we kind of track how we're doing. I also like breaking that down by months so we can see what are the trends.
Exactly. Yeah. And one other thing that we do is, especially being in real estate, like it's important to be able to forecast. And so one thing that we pull up on that same report every Monday is how many closings we have set so far for this month. What is the income? What is the GCI? And what is the net income coming into the business? And that allows us to make decisions like, can we invest in all the new signage that we need this month? Can we book that client event? Does it make financial sense for us to go visit that mastermind, right? Like we're able to make better financial decisions based on forecasts for the entire month, as opposed to just like, oh, look what we made last month and not looking ahead, the weeks ahead.
Yeah, we use Sisu for that, for our analytics and to look at the kind of cash flow forecast that's coming in. What about like any other mistakes you've seen? Like what have we not covered? One of the ones that like kind of comes to mind as I'm thinking about this conversation, a very common mistake, I think, in the married game of business is I understand proximity is important, but like you're glued to the fucking hip. Like you drive in the same car everywhere. You go to all the same meetings. Why is that a problem? I mean, it's cute, but it's a fucking problem.
It is a problem. And I think, again, I think a lot of people, who do this, it's about wanting to work together, and their intention is good, right? Their intention is that they're spending time together while they're also doing stuff, they're collaborating. But what it doesn't allow you to do is grow exponentially. With the way that you and I have structured our business, like first, we're both in production. So if we're each selling between 50 and 80 houses a year, one, that's a fantastic income for our family. We're both contributing to. And two, we're both able to get so much more experience by doing all of those things kind of separately, but bouncing off and collaborating behind the scenes. The other part of that is, as we've grown and moved into different capacities in the business, I can now be hiring, interviewing, coaching, training, building SOPs, updating SOPs, making sure that people in the office feel loved on, feel warm and fuzzy, while you're over here producing and building and creating and doing all these things in another area. So we're able to exponentially add on more revenue or bring more people into the company by separating and stepping into our geniuses in the business, as opposed to doing every single thing together and working as one human. Because one human is going to have capacity.
Right.
Issues.
One plus one is 2.
Yes.
Unless it's still 1.
Right.
Right. And so I think that this is something I've seen when people are like, they're dating still, or like it's like kind of a newer relationship, and they're like they're super glued to the hip. And I get that a little bit.
Yeah, we get it.
You know, but like in our world, like we basically like, you know, fist bump at 4 a.m. You go your direction, I go my direction, and then we see each other a few times in the office. Then it's like, hey, I'll see you home at 6 o'clock.
Yeah, we do Marco Polo all day. Like that's literally how we catch up.
And I can't even imagine like both trying to be in the car talking at the same time. Like we're both on the phone nonstop, or Marco Polo nonstop, and we're literally like shouting over each other, right? And a lot of what we do, like I know that you do the same thing. We save our phone calls for when we're driving, right? Exactly. How do I get more bang for my buck on time? Well, I overlap things, right?
Exactly.
And if I know I got to drive somewhere, I'm going to be talking the whole time I'm driving there. So I'm knocking out calls and conversations and follow-ups at the same time that I'm driving to where I got to go.
Exactly right. Yep.
And if you've got a Tesla, it's driving you there as well. All right. That was pretty good. Anything else that we want to add before we sign off?
I think I'd like you to speak to kind of like staying, we talked about it a little bit, but really staying in your lane. So expanding on that kind of concept of I'm working over here, you're working over here, 1 + 1 is 2. How do we stay in our lane? How do we avoid, or how do we deal with when we need to cross over into each other's AORs, areas of responsibility in the business?
Yeah, it's a good one. I think you have to have a very clear process for starters so that we both know what to expect out of each other.
Yep.
And then you got to just not micromanage the other person. That's the most important thing, you know, is let them have some autonomy to what they're doing and know that there's processes in place to drive the ship. The ship's not just wandering through sea. There is a map on where it's going to go, and that's your SOPs. And so if you don't have that, that creates that kind of doubt, which then creates the micromanagement. But when you have the SOPs, clear processes, then you just have to trust the person to drive their part of the business. And if they make a mistake, then you just have to talk about it. You know?
Yeah, 100%. Exactly. Overall, would you recommend people who are married to get in a business together?
I'll answer that in a second. But one of the things that we've never done, which I think is really cool, like I've made some huge mistakes. I've probably made $50,000, $100,000 mistakes. Like this is part of the life cycle of being an entrepreneur, right? Made millions of dollars, but I've definitely made some huge fucking mistakes along the way. You've made some big mistakes along the way, probably not as big as those. But we never like, hey, you're a fucking retard. Like, why did you do this? Right? We're just like, okay, so we took that one on the chin. What did we learn from this?
We almost lost a tooth on that one. All right, well.
I think that's pretty commendable because like going through 3 different businesses, lots of ups, lots of downs, millions and millions of dollars, like there's definitely been some mistakes, and we don't like hammer the other person those mistakes. We definitely talk about it.
Well, of course.
And we debrief it and we learn from it, but we don't abuse the person over it.
Well, know what I mean? And I think that's such a good point, because I think that really comes down to like, ultimately we have respect for each other, right? Like I respect you. I want to be in alignment with the decisions that we make in business and in our personal life with you. And if I make a decision that you aren't in alignment with, and then it turns out to be a complete and utter fuck up, like you're going to have a harder time forgiving me, so to speak, right? Or like not being super upset unless I actually say, hey, this is what I'm doing, whatever, and you knew about it beforehand. Right.
It wasn't just a surprise.
Exactly. So I think because we have that alignment and because we run things by each other out of that respect, when it is a mistake, we're kind of like, all right, like, well, I mean, I was in alignment with it, right?
Yeah, it
so
wasn't
like,
made in a silo.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. All right. So would I recommend people getting into business married? Yeah, I think it can be really cool. And I think it can really enrich your marriage as well. Mm-hmm. You know, especially when you both grow together, that can really take things to a full new dimension that you probably never would have gotten to if it was just the marriage without the business. Yeah. Like for you and I, we've been on this obsession of growth, and we know that business growth is tied to personal growth, but they're so interconnected as well, you know, and that's been the trajectory and that kind of mission that we've been on for, you know, I'm 39 years old now, so for 20 years, 21 years. You know?
Yeah. I mean, and you know, I think the quick and dirty of all this is simply, if you're thinking about getting into business together, it's a yes. There are guidelines that you need to put in place. There are boundaries that you need to set. There are things that you need to flesh out. You need to discuss how conflict is going to be handled. You need to really think about what happens if this, like realistically, I mean, and I do this with people we bring into our organization too. I tell people coming into our organization, at some point you're going to cost me $10,000. And for people who are making $60,000 or $70,000, that's a shit ton of money.
They can't comprehend that.
That's a shit ton of money. So on this scale, it's like at some point you're probably going to cost me $1 million. And that's the truth. And be like, will you still love that person if they do that to you, right? If the answer is yes, then go for it. Like that truly is.
Yeah, if you can accept that, then that's a good litmus test to move forward with. So if people want to connect with us, where can they find you at? What's your Instagram handle?
I'm at Rachel Novak with the extra A on Instagram and Rachel Novak on Facebook.
Cool. And I'm at The Real Mike Novak. I didn't get on Instagram until like 3 years ago. So Mike Novak was not available, but at The Real Mike Novak, you can find us there. Meetthenovaks.com is our website if you want to check us out, learn more about us, or possibly partner with us in business in some way, shape, or form. We'll see you next week.
See you then.